Authorities in the French overseas territory of Mayotte fear hundreds or perhaps even thousands of people have been killed by the most destructive cyclone in nearly a century. The islands off the East African coast were already France's poorest overseas region before Cyclone Chido flattened entire communities. Aid transports by the French military have started to arrive as rescuers race to stave off a humanitarian disaster. For more on this story, let's bring in journalist Daniel Brown in Paris, who's reported extensively on French and African affairs. Daniel, do we have a clearer picture now about the destruction on the island?
Well, to be frank, Gerhard, no, it's still very hard because of the lack of communications. I mean, 99% of fixed internet customers are disconnected. 51 out of the 54 mobile network antennas are still out of service, primarily due to power outages. So it's certainly hard to calculate the extent of this destruction. Officially, the death toll remains still at 14 fatalities and approximately 250 injuries. But the department's prefect this morning said you could multiply that figure by up to 100. For the moment, we just don't know. As your report said earlier, this is the worst cyclone in 90 years, and it hits France and Europe's poorest region. And that's seen in these images of shanty towns that have been flattened, and the entire infrastructure has really been hit very hard. We think that maybe as much as a third of the residents there, of the 300,000 people living on Mayotte, have been displaced by this, and they're slowly coming to terms with the catastrophe that they're seeing in front of them.
Now, France has already sent rescuers and aid supplies. What more is needed?
Yes, it does. It has deployed these rescuers, firefighters from the mainland and nearby territories like the Reunion Islands. It's established air and sea bridges to deliver supplies and personnel to these affected areas. But for the moment, we're talking about a maximum of 800 or so military personnel and firefighters, which is simply not enough given the scale of the disaster. Their priorities will be restoring electricity and access to drinking water, as well as repairing these critical infrastructure, such as hospitals and the airport, which has been devastated. Several of my friends are still stranded here in France, unable to return to their homes. And the government is trying to collaborate not only in terms of with the military and the health infrastructure, but the French Red Cross. While these measures are trying to address immediate needs, the French government's not yet specified the total amount of aid or detailed the long-term reconstruction plans. And we're anticipating further announcements throughout the day, but we'll have to wait for accurate assessments of the cyclone's impact.
Now, there's a report by the French Parliament from earlier this year that highlighted problems with disaster management in France's overseas territories. Could this crisis have been prevented?
Most certainly, Gerhard. The devastation caused by this cyclone is just exacerbating factors related to long-term poor infrastructure and disastrous governance. You have to know that Mayotte is a disputed territory, and the gerrymandering of the referenda back in the 70s tore it away from the Comoros Islands and the archipelago next door. There's been several UN resolutions condemning the French, and it's linked to these socio-political tensions. A large portion of Mayotte's population reside in these informal settlements with substandard constructions that have been hit so hard by the cyclone. They're often populated by people from neighboring Comoros who are desperate to return to what was their ancestral homes. And despite Mayotte's status as a French overseas department, for the last 13 years, there's been chronic underinvestment in really essential infrastructure. These include housing, water supplies, and public facilities. And Mayotte was grappling before with a severe drought and leading to water rationing before all this happened. So the scale of the disaster and the existing infrastructural weaknesses are posing significant challenges to effective relief work and to make Mayotte a more resilient island.
The journalist Daniel Brown there. Thank you very much, Daniel.
Thank you.